Hello tanks and tankettes, and welcome to a viewer replay, courtesy this time of Wally Bally 13. I'm just going to call him Wally. Maybe it's meant to be Wally Bolly or Wally Bally, or I don't even know, but we're just going to go with Wally. Now, he's in the STB-1, which is of course the Japanese tier 10 medium. It's got a pretty good DPM, it's got reasonably trolled turret armour, so long as people don't have time to aim at the weaker areas. The commander's hatch is a bit of a weak spot, I know, and I think the front of the turret generally is, like if you hit towards the front near the gun, I think that's weaker than if you hit slightly more towards the sides. So it's reasonable against snapshots, but if people do have time to sit and aim, it's not all that tough. So he's got some pretty decent matchmaking. There's only a couple of tier 10s on each side, although on the enemy team they do have a Guerrilla 15 platoon, which might be a bit nasty, and there is also artillery to worry about as well. Now he starts off going up to the top northeast corner, as do his two fellow tier 10 medium tanks. They've also got an IS-7 and an E4, so they've got a fairly nice lineup of tier 10s. The enemy team, well, they've also got an IS-7, but 50B is not particularly tough in terms of its armour, and the guerrillas of course are very squashy, so they're probably not going to be on the front lines. However, also coming up this way, very slowly in comparison to these medium tanks, are a Super Pershing, a T-32 and a KV-4. And the reason I point this out is because that's going to be 6 out of 15 people all coming up to this corner, which is quite a high proportion of the team, so they need to really do something unless they are massively outnumbered, because otherwise the team that they have in the middle is not going to last all that long. They've already lost the IS-7, I'm not quite sure how, but they have. In the middle they've basically got a bunch of light tanks and a Leo PTA, which is not very tough, and then an IS-3 and the Conqueror just slightly behind them. There's a slightly comic moment here where he's looking for the outline, he's searching for it with his reticle, and then he doesn't quite realise that the IS-7 is in fact below where he was looking. So he probably could have had a shot there, although whether it would have penned at that sort of angle into the lower front plate, it might have done, but we'll never know. I'll also note this is, two things actually. This is a 915, is it 915.1 or 915.2? Either way, it's a 915 replay, and so we're not going to get the outlines a lot of the time. It might look like he's shooting at nothing, but that's just a replay bug. It's just we can't see the outline of the tank in the replay. But the other thing I wanted to note is that I'm actually dog-sitting for my parents over this weekend, so the acoustics might sound a little bit different. I've basically decamped my PC to my parents' place, and so I'm in a different room, and if you hear the clacking of dog paws on wooden floors, or if just the acoustics sound different, you'll know why. So he's taken a couple of hits there, including from artillery, which is a bit nasty. He's had to use both a repair kit and his med kit already, so let's hope he doesn't lose any more crew members. But they have, with taking out the IS-7, they've also figured out that there's not a lot here, so they are now just pushing. However, that 140 just got completely nailed by the Lorraine artillery, so that's not so good. So he does a little handbrake turn there, which you can kind of do. You can't skid around the same way that you can in light tanks, of course, but you can still pull some fairly sharpish turns in the faster medium tanks. And this thing, I don't think it's the fastest of the tier 10 mediums by any means, but it does have a pretty decent horsepower to weight ratio, so it accelerates reasonably well. So there's at least one tank defending the enemy base, and this is, at this point it's just turned into a bit of a furball. It's very messy. The enemy team does have a numerical advantage right now, which might prove to be decisive, but they've also got some very low health tanks, including Pershing, who is now just gone, so that's nice. He may also have a shot on 50B, and he does. That's actually a high roll, but not high enough to kill him. Left him on not a lot of health though. Takes a shot at the Gorilla, but that misses unfortunately. And, well, there we go, 50B's down. At the moment, his best bet is probably to play a bit more defensively, because artillery isn't going to be somewhere that can hit him right now, hopefully. Artillery clearly isn't in the usual spot up in the northwest corner, because the T-32 and the Super Pershing are trying to push round into the 30B, but they are unfortunately going to, and there we go, their RT just gets spotted. They're going to discover that the 30B is not alone. So the Super Pershing is done. The T-32 tries to come up behind, but T-32 versus a 30B, that's not an equal contest. And a WZ-111-14 turns up to the party as well, so there goes the T-32. So meanwhile, Wally has done a bit more damage. Every time he was popping up to shoot at the Jagdtiger, he was getting spotted. So he's got to be a bit cautious here, and he's realised that it's basically now him and the Centurion. The E4 has somehow hung on down in the south, but he's about to die to a Guerrilla 15. So this is not a great position, because he knows the 30B and the WZ might now push round from where they were. And that would be a bit bad, because him and the Centurion aren't particularly healthy right now. But the Centurion is unfortunately about to die. There he goes. Now pulls up for a shot. He does get spotted here, but the AMX-30 does not react in time. He could have slammed on the brakes and stayed in cover, but instead he drove right out into Wally's shot. But I think Wally at this point figures that this is not the best position. He could have people coming up from south. He could have like Guerrilla coming from his west, not from south, from the north rather. So he's pulling back to try and maybe find more advantageous terrain, but there is still artillery to worry about, and because it's that French arty, and there it is, it's fast. He actually gets spotted. Now in theory he can one-shot this guy, except he gets a really low roll, so it was just not enough. And he takes a blind hit, but it misses. The Guerrilla just derps right up, donks his shot into the ground, which is a bit unfortunate for him. And as you can see, Wally has gone to his HE shells, so he can do a bit more damage and hopefully do some mischief to this guy's modules and crew. So that's his last HE shell. He knows the other Guerrilla has just driven through the cap, and there's the artillery. Finally take him out of the equation. Now, if you can get this Guerrilla out, that'll be perfect, because, well, he's still got the WZ to deal with as well, and there he is, and he's full health. Now I think the Guerrilla maybe got a bit greedy. He could have waited, he could have easily waited for the WZ to turn up, and instead he ploughed right in, got punished hard, and now the WZ has come in, but he's alone, and he is absolutely letting Wally control the pace here. He's not trying to push Wally at all. Now it's possible he himself is waiting for the other Guerrilla to come up behind Wally, and Wally has to have been aware. In fact, he actually indicates that he knows that other Guerrilla's coming up behind him. But he reacts a little bit too slowly. He maybe judges that he had a bit more time, and it would have been preferable, of course, to take the hit from the WZ than the Guerrilla, but he has fortunately survived. Now it still looked like it was going to be dicey, but then RNGesus gives him a little pat on the head, and he gets really quite lucky with that tracking shot. And of course the Guerrilla's turret can't go all the way around, so that's it. That won him the game. So this came awfully close to instead being a loss, but that tracking shot made all the difference. But still, I think he got a bit lucky in that the Guerrilla didn't high roll him much. I think it was like, what, 758? 7 something like that. So it wasn't like it was a massive high roll, but even so, it was a bit lucky that he was then able to get the tracking shot and just survive and make it a very close win. So that was an ace tanker. He had a high caliber and a top gun with, 7 kills. Over 7,000 damage done, which was by far the most on his team. And he also managed a fairly respectable 2k damage blocked. He had some nice turret bounces in that one. It was a pretty good game all in all. And he had 1 or 2 teammates that were okay as well. I mean, the Centurion really was the best of them with nearly 4,000 damage. And after that, the E4 only landed 2 damaging hits, apparently. The T49 managed nearly 2k damage. Most of the rest of the team were kind of 1500 damage and below. So, yeah, his teammates made that probably a bit more difficult than it needed to be, but in the end, with a bit of luck, it actually came down to being a very, very close win. And it was almost the enemy Gorilla platoon that clinched it for them. I mean, he did over 7k damage, but one of the enemy Gorilla 15s did also just over 7k damage, so he wasn't that far behind Wally at all. So yeah, that was close, that was tense, and when I was watching that through, I really didn't know how it was going to play out to get that kind of result, but there we are. So hopefully you have enjoyed this replay, and if you have, you can hit the like button, you can leave any comments below, you can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.